I'm finishing up the glaze on these super simple French toast muffins. It's the same as French toast, that custard base with perfect bread, and guess what? It's super easy. The glaze finishes it off. I think you're gonna love these. Let's make some. French toast is always a favorite, and when it's in a muffin form, I think it just elevates it even better. Maybe makes it more, I don't know, fun. It's perfect for brunches, it's perfect for a breakfast. It's just perfect for anytime you want something kind of out of the ordinary that doesn't take too much work and can go together pretty quickly. So what French toast starts with, no matter if you're making muffins or not, is a custard base. And by a custard base, I just mean eggs with cream and milk. It's that perfect mixture that makes that beautiful French toast. So we're starting with eggs. And I like to put them right here in my bowl, and then I like to mix them first. So instead of whisking everything together separately, like just pouring it all in, then whisking it, I like to make sure I whisk my eggs, because sometimes if you don't get things evenly mixed, especially like a French toast, you get these pockets of egg once you're eating it, and you don't want that. You want everything just to come together really perfectly. So I have all my eggs right in there, and I just want to whisk them until they're smooth. So break up the yolks, just whisk them really quickly, and now we can just move on to our other ingredients, and that's the best part. So I love eggs because they're that carrier that can bring so many things together. So once that's whisked, and you make sure you just don't see the whites, any separated, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you can see now it's homogeneous. We're gonna add the rest of the custard, which makes it really good. So we have some heavy cream. Now it's important to note we're not doing all heavy cream. That would be too rich. It wouldn't have the right ratio of flavor and richness. So we're gonna cut that with whole milk. And the reason whole milk, as opposed to a lower fat milk, better flavor. You know, anytime you're gonna cook or bake, whole milk is gonna give you more of that flavor. So I'm gonna pour that right in here. And then I'm gonna put in some powdered sugar. Now I'm using powdered here instead of granulated because I like that it mixes in a little bit easier. It has just a stitch of cornstarch, which actually can tighten it up a little bit better too. But it dissolves in really quickly, so you don't have to really work that granulated sugar in, which I like. Of course, gonna add some vanilla. You know what? You measure that with your heart. And what that means is you measure it liberally. I make my own vanilla. You can check my website for the recipe. Super simple, but it will give you the most flavorful, most beautiful vanilla. And believe me, you're gonna wanna use it all the time. You need some cinnamon. It's French toast. You have to have it. And I think it's important to note that cinnamon is really gonna be that forward note, but it's gonna work well with the vanilla. And then also, I always think it needs a little bit of citrus. I'm gonna use orange in this case because the orange is gonna really have this nice bright pop, and I think the orange and vanilla just really play well. Anytime I make French toast, for my nieces, for my nephew, for myself, for my friends, it's gonna have a little bit of orange. I think it really brings out all those flavors, and it really just wakes everything up. So I always just take my microplane, turn it upside down, so I can grab all those oils and all that zest just on the outside of the orange. Then I'm just gonna turn it over and knock it right in, and we'll whisk it. This is, to me, why I love French toast. It comes together super simple. Now, as opposed to having to then cook each piece on the stove, we're gonna do it all together in muffins. And that way you can have everything ready at once, so you don't have to be sitting over the stove when everyone else is enjoying French toast. It brings everyone together, and I think that's the best part. Food should bring us together. It should be something to me that always is accessible and available for us to make at home, something that we can do, and that's what all this is about, figuring out that we can do it. So once that custard is really completed, we can move on to the bread. Now, any bread really can work. A lot of people will love a brioche style bread. I love a brioche style bread too. It's really eggy and kind of rich, but I also just love a French style, American French style bread. This is my one from my website. I've made some recently, so I have some in the freezer, and that's what I'm gonna use. You know, use what you have. You don't have to have a certain type necessarily, but you may find if you try different breads, you're really gonna like a certain one. But you may also find that, you know what, whatever you have is just great. So I'm cutting this in slightly small pieces because we are putting this in muffin tin, you know, size. So you don't want them massive, you want them to be able to fit in there. So you can see I'm cutting it somewhat like about a 1/2 inch size cubes, and I'm putting it in. Now, the one thing I will say I do, as opposed to when you just say like one loaf of bread or half a loaf of bread, that can be pretty hard, especially when we're working with muffin size. So I like to actually measure my bread cubes. So if you slice them all about the same size, you should get a pretty even reading, and that gives you a better depiction of how much bread you're actually using. So we're gonna put this in here, and then we'll mix it all together. So as opposed to traditional just over the stove when we're gonna cook it, you would dip it, turn it, put it in butter and cook it. The thing here is we want it to actually soak in some of this, kind of a mixture of a bread pudding because we're baking it. So we're gonna actually put all these cubes right in the custard, which is kind of my favorite part here. And we're gonna let them, and yes, I'm sure the question's gonna be, well, shouldn't it be day-old bread? Shouldn't it be stale bread? You can, but you know what? No, this is morning of, this is quick and simple. I'm not worried about stale versus not. I use fresh, I've used slightly dry bread. It's okay. What we do wanna do though here is we're folding this into the custard, and I'm gonna let it sit in a few minutes because I want it to soak in before we just put it in all those muffin tins. And I wanna make sure each piece here has a chance to really start soaking it in, which you can see already. If you look down here, we don't have near as much custard as you would expect. So in just a couple minutes of sitting here, I'm gonna let it just wait a little bit to make sure, and then we'll fill those muffin tins. And guys, we are gonna be on the way to something really delicious. So I pulled my greased, and you wanna grease it very well, butter it very well, just a normal sized muffin tin. You know, we don't use muffin tins a lot, do we? But what I'm doing is just filling each one. Now, I'm kind of scooping it, but this is just more because it's an easier delivery method. You just want to evenly disperse them. So once I have it all somewhat going, I will go back and take any of the last pieces here, which you can see there's always going to be a few, because you never know quite how much to mash in or not, but what you can see is this bread has really soaked in. Some of them will break down. It all depends what kind of bread you're using, so don't feel bad if you see some of the pieces breaking down slightly. That's okay. That will actually make these muffins more muffin-like and hold together, so it's not anything to worry about. I think so often we worry about these little details on, does mine look perfect? Does it look right? Mine doesn't always look perfect. Mine doesn't always look right, but guess what? It's perfect for at home. It's perfect for your family. It's homemade. That is the perfect part. So I am just making sure I have each piece used up. And then what I want to do is see, even there's a little bit of custard in my bowl. We're not wasting that. I know, usually you would say this is taking way too much time, but we're not wasting that. We're gonna just pour it on little bits. It doesn't have to be on every one. You know, you can kind of keep stirring it to make it soak in all of this custard, but there's always gonna be just a little bit at the bottom. And guess what? That's egg, that's cream, that's flavor, it's vanilla. It's not something we just want to disregard here. So we're gonna put it right in. All these little things. I know you don't usually see them, but it's important to know that's what we do at home. We use up the little bits. We do things like that. So here I have just a little bit of granulated sugar, and I do specifically want granulated this time because I'm gonna put some cinnamon with it. And what we're gonna do is do a quick cinnamon sugar mixture. So as we mix that together, you know, I don't know if you were like me, but growing up, if maybe you were having a day you wanted a really quick breakfast or weren't feeling the best, which is kind of funny to think about now, but mom would make buttered toast with cinnamon sugar on top. It was so comforting. So it's that same idea. What we're gonna do is we're gonna take this and we're gonna sprinkle just on top of these. So it's not a streusel, but what it will do is this kind of crackly, a little bit of a interesting topping on these. So do you see how it's just kind of coating them? And it's gonna drive home that cinnamon flavor, which I like too. The sugar will kind of caramelize and crystallize, and that's the important part. So I'm gonna finish doing all these. I'm gonna throw it in the oven then, let it bake until they're baked through but still custardy in the center, and we'll top them off with a little glaze. So I took them out of the oven. They were a little bit more puffed, but you need to let them cool down before you eat them. So then they kind of just come back to these beautiful, and look how they're literally like muffins. You can pull them out. It's the beautiful part. So they're soft and kind of custardy in the middle, yet they're French toast. It's really the best thing. So I want to make a quick glaze for them. So I'm just gonna take some powdered sugar. And I do always like to, especially for a glaze, you want to sift the powdered sugar. You know, those little pieces that don't break down in a glaze will definitely notice. So you just knock it against to really make sure it's sifted through. If you don't do this, you're just gonna not have a nice, you're gonna have a little bit more of a inconsistent glaze, which to me is not the fun part. So a glaze can consist of any sorts of things. This one's gonna be pretty simple. Confectioner sugar, and the reason we use confectioner is because it actually will kind of tighten up the glaze really quickly, as opposed to a traditional sugar. And then we're gonna put with it a few other additives to make more flavor. So I have that orange left that we zested. I'm gonna just take it and squeeze a little bit right into here. I want that little bit of bright citrus note to it, and this is actually what's gonna help create the glaze too, with a little bit of cream. Cream will add a little bit more of a creaminess to it, which I like. To me, it's really essential. And with the glaze, it's always important to note, you can always just add more sugar or more of the liquid. So if it's not perfect the first time, don't worry. So I'm gonna add a little bit more sugar just to get to the right amount I need, and I'll just spoon this over the whole thing. Once that's all whisked, I am just gonna put a dash of salt in, just to kind of balance out the flavor. It's a lot of sweet going into these, so you need a little bit of salt. And once it's all done, you can just see it's a perfect consistency to just take some of that and kind of go over each one. Now, there's no perfection to this, but just look at that. Like, I mean, there is a perfection, who am I kidding? This is just gilding the lily of something that it's not needed, but it really finishes these off in a nice way. So usually French toast would be served with a maple syrup. You could still do that. I don't think these really need it. You have delicious custard in there. You have really everything going on for it that you don't really need it. So what I'm gonna do is just taste one. So that's the one I want, I think, right there. I want this one. Just like on a cinnamon roll, I want the middle one. So when you take it out, I like that it's a muffin. It can break apart though. Oh, look how you get that beautiful interior. You can tell it's still like moist. That's what you want. This is a time where you use the word moist. This is good. What I love, and this to me is always good French toast, just that little hint of orange really is a delicious thing. It brings out and marries the flavors, gives you the vanilla. It's really nice and soft and custardy in here, which you can see, but then it has a nice little crispness on the edge from baking, so it starts caramelizing those sugars, gets a little bit of that brown tint, and that's exactly what I want. And then that glaze on top finishes it off. Gives you that last hit of sweetness, rounds it all together. So what do I hope you do with these? I hope you make them. I hope you see that French toast, whether it's in muffin form or not, is super easy. It takes a custard, it goes together with the bread, and it can be made into muffins pretty simply. What's great about this is it's perfect for a crowd. It's perfect so you can enjoy it with your guests because it's all made at one time and share it around. That's what good food's about. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for this recipe and all my other recipes. Until then, I know what you're gonna be doing.